Nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's your creepiest hospital story? I did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A pimp lit one of his prostitutes on fire, and she immediately bear-hugged him, causing them to both suffer pretty severe injuries. Unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn. They were both being treated in the same ICU, but on opposite ends. Weeks later, she ends up coding and passes away. And after about 30 minutes, as things start to quiet down, the pimp starts screaming from his room, "Get her out! Get the goddamn bitch out of my room!" I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. One night, I was working in the NICU, which happened to also be on the 4th floor, but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a shortcut down to the cafeteria, which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 a.m., I was ready to take a short break and wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors and saw a kid skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned and in the blink of an eye, totally vanished. I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you are damn sure I never used that hallway at night ever again. I used to work in a skilled nursing facility. I was usually assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. One night, as I was stocking my cart in the linen room, I heard someone shuffle up behind me. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was no one else in the room. The door was still shut too. Another lady started to complain that a man was coming into her room at night. Again, Alzheimer's, so I didn't think much of it. To reassure her, I told her I'd check on her throughout the night. She complained about this man every night for 2 more weeks when I asked her to describe him to me. She said, "He's real handsome and wears a black suit. Oh, he's right behind you now, honey." That freaked me the f*** out. Of course, there was no one behind me. She died the next night in her sleep. I was working the night shift when a ward patient's relative came running to the nurse's station in a panic. "Nurse, come quick!" she cried. "What happened?" I asked. "You have to see it for yourself." We then ran to the ward, and an old lady patient was crying and holding onto the bed for dear life. Her bed was shaking. Now, you're probably thinking that the lady was the one causing all that shaking, but she was this frail, practically emaciated thing. She couldn't have barely rattled the bed rails. The ward had only 2 other patients in it and their respective watchers. Everyone was huddled in a corner, shaking in fright. Apparently, that particular ward was seldom used, and the bed that old lady lay in was rarely occupied. People who have slept in it complained of nightmares where they hear screams and laughter of angry children. I guess some restless spirits called dibs on that particular bed. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Psychiatric nurse here. I worked in an acute care adult unit but was sent to work with the kids one evening shift. It was after 10 p.m. and all patients were in their rooms and in bed. Suddenly, I heard a child screaming. I ran to the room and a 7-year-old boy was hysterical. He was crying, sweating, and shaking. He said he saw something. After he settled down, he told me that he saw a white man with gray hair and a hospital gown in his room. While we discussed what he saw, the child froze in fear, tears rolling down his face. He whispered to me, "Oh my God, he's right behind you." We decided to address the man and tell him that the little boy was scared. The boy said the man turned around and left after that. The only thing anyone in the unit would have heard was the boy's scream at the beginning. All other discussion was done quietly in his room. Not even 3 minutes later, a 17-year-old male at the end of the hall started screaming. I ran to his room and he was standing on his bed trying to get away from a white man in a hospital gown. I'm an EMT. I'm not religious, but I've experienced some stuff I can't explain. I was in the basement of the hospital grabbing a new gurney as ours was ripped apart from a violent patient. It was 3 a.m. The basement storage unit was packed with stuff, so when I felt my shirt get pulled on, I assumed it got caught on an object. Then it happened again, only this time I heard a little girl's voice, crystal clear, say, "I'm lost." My heart was pounding. I felt all the hairs on my body stand up and I called my partner down to help with the gurney. The pediatric unit was on the 3rd floor and was locked down for the night. There are no visitors in the hospital. I was working my regular night shift in a bone marrow transplant unit with one other nurse. We had 5 patients, and it was about 3:30 a.m. My coworker had just come out of room 4. She had been emptying a urinal when the bathroom door suddenly closed on her, and she spilled urine on herself. But I digress. She proceeded to tell me that there was a young gentleman who had been in that room who had died a rather gruesome death. This man was slated to go home, but one night around 4 a.m., the nurses heard a thump. They rushed into the room, and this man was in the bathroom, his central line ripped out, basically a catheter inserted into a major vein. There's blood everywhere. They coded him, but he died right there in the bathroom. No one is sure what happened or why he pulled his line, but the scene was a bloodbath. Now here comes the scary part. A few weeks later, a sweet little old lady is in the same room and asks the nurse if someone has died in there. The nurse explained that since they're in a hospital, it was likely that someone died. Well, the lady says, I think a young man died in here. The nurse asks why, and the lady responds, because he's talking to me. I worked in a small family-run nursing home for 6 years as a nurse aide. It was an orphanage before it became a nursing home. When residents get close to death, they always see a little girl. I was passing dinner trays and saw one of my patients had his back turned and was talking and laughing in the corner. I knocked and asked him who he was talking to, and he said, "This little girl came into my room and she was scared." That patient died 3 days later. Fast forward 6 months and we had another patient screaming about a little girl grabbing his feet, demanding that she leave him alone. He died that night. The little girl has come up over the years, and it's always the same thing. Patients see her, and then they die. My other coworkers also had the same experience. It's very unsettling. My mom worked in OB and told me a story that happened where she worked. There was a young Filipino woman who came in to give birth. Unfortunately, there were complications during the delivery, and the mother died. The baby stayed in the nursery for a couple of days while its future was being decided. During that time, several nurses reported hearing someone singing near that baby. It wasn't in English, and they all thought it was the mother's voice. I'm a South African nurse. The weirdest thing happened to me when I was working night shift. I had a patient who I thought was playing with his IV. I eventually confronted him after having to open the clamp for what seemed like the 100th time that night. He got really irate with me and said he had done no such thing. He then blamed it on a young nurse in a white dress whom he said had fiddled repeatedly with it. I was confused because we wear specific uniforms in South Africa, and they were not white at this specific hospital. Needless to say, I was really irritated, and we both ended the conversation feeling exasperated. I didn't think much about his story for several weeks until one night I was dealing with a different patient. The call light rang, and when I went to answer it, the patient said he had a problem with one of my staff. Curious, I asked who it is. He said a young nurse in a white uniform was standing in the doorway of the dark bathroom, just staring at him, and it was freaking him out. My hair stood on end, but I reassured him and checked the bathroom just to be sure. There was nothing there, but I will never forget it. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories like this. This is Reddit Story Hour. See you in the next video, and happy Halloween.